Let's start by talking about what the Supreme Court did this week. They heard probably the biggest case this term regarding church-state separation, and it threatens to dismantle church-state separation even further, as if such a thing were even possible at this point. So I'm going to try to give you the background, a little bit of background about what this argument was even about, and then talk a little bit about what the justices said. Basically, this case involved St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School, which is a publicly funded charter school that Christians wanted to open in Oklahoma last year until the Oklahoma Supreme Court said, "What the hell are you doing?" and voted 7-1 against allowing this place to open because clearly it violates church-state separation. Oklahoma's constitution has a law that says you can't use public money to promote religion. That's totally what this was. But since it also violates the federal constitution, it was a federal issue as well. And it's not just that the state would have been funding this Catholic school. The problems went beyond that. Just to name a few, unlike public schools, St. Isidore would not require teachers to be certified. They would not have to accept openly LGBTQ teachers. They could explicitly promote Catholic doctrine during school hours. Then you have the possibilities like what happens if a student becomes pregnant because they're teenagers? That sort of stuff happens. Well, they could expel that kid. What about trans students? If they commit the crime of existing, this school could kick them out because, the Catholic Church doesn't accept trans people. Sex education, probably not a part of the curriculum. And this school would probably not have the resources to help special needs students. So this was not a charter school that happened to be Catholic. This is a Catholic school that decided to call itself a charter school so it could take money from the state pocketbook. You know what I mean? One of the surprising supporters of church-state separation in all this is this guy, Drummond. He's the Attorney General of Oklahoma. He's also a Republican nominee for governor of Oklahoma. He's also a surprising supporter of church-state separation. He's one of the only high-ranking Republicans in the state of Oklahoma who defends church-state separation. And this guy argued that, hey, taxpayers in my state do not need to foot the bill for this religious school. He actually filed the lawsuit to stop this Catholic school from opening. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court took his side in all this. But naturally, when that decision came down 7-1 from the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the defenders of this place said, don't worry, since it's also a federal issue, we're going to ask our buddies on the U.S. Supreme Court to look into this. And that's where they made the argument that denying us this chance to take public dollars, that's religious discrimination. This is how SCOTUS blog described their argument here. The school contended that the Oklahoma Supreme Court's ruling unconstitutionally punished the free exercise of religion. Oops, let me pull this back up here. There we go. By disqualifying the religious from government aid. What's more, the school argued, the state Supreme Court circumvented the U.S. Supreme Court's cases establishing a right to the free exercise of religion by transmuting St. Isidore into an arm of the government. They're basically saying, look, we have nothing to do with the state government, the federal government. We are a private school. We just happen to be a charter school, and we just happen to be religious, so give us all your money. It doesn't make any sense. Also, they're not disqualified from government aid, but they can't have a school, a public school, which is what they want to call this thing, and take government aid while also promoting religion. You do that on your own dime. It makes no sense. So the state of Oklahoma, Drummond, the Attorney General, he told the Supreme Court, don't take up this case. You have no reason to take up this case because the school is promoting its religious beliefs. The Oklahoma Constitution says you can't do that. There's no argument here. End of story. But SCOTUS took it up anyway. I should point out that Amy Coney Barrett decided to recuse herself from the case. She's not participating in it. She didn't actually explain why, but the basic theory is that she's really close friends with a law professor at Notre Dame, where she used to work, who has helped advise the Catholic schools legal team. And so to avoid any perception of bias, Amy Coney Barrett said, I'm not involved in this. Okay, fine. That still leaves 8 justices. And the way this works is if there's right now it's a 5-3 split. Conservatives still have a majority. If the ruling turns out to be a 4-4 tie, that's as good as a win for the good guys. The Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision would stand. But the thinking is, well, there are 5 conservative justices. They're going to do exactly what you think they're going to do. The other thing I want to point out is that a coalition of church-state separation groups, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the ACLU, the Education Law Center, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they argued there's no argument here. The law is fine in Oklahoma as is. Nothing was violated. This is what their statement was back in January when the Supreme Court took up this case. The law is clear. Charter schools are public schools, so they must be secular and open to all students. The Oklahoma Supreme Court correctly found that the state's approval of a religious public charter school was unlawful and unconstitutional. We urge the U.S. Supreme Court to just say that's correct and safeguard public education, church-state separation, and religious freedom for all. Oklahoma taxpayers, including our plaintiffs, should not be forced to fund a religious public school that plans to discriminate against people into one religion and indoctrinate students into one religion. Converting public schools into Sunday schools would be a dangerous sea change for our democracy. So, yeah, it's a strong statement, but it totally makes sense. And they also, I should say, filed their own lawsuit to block this school from getting public funding. But Drummond, the attorney general, he said, I got this. Their lawsuit was put on hold. His went forward. The Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled on his case and said this school should not be allowed to exist, not with federal state funding. So, it is possible that the U.S. Supreme Court could say Oklahoma is required to fund. If you have a charter school program, you have to allow religious schools in that mix. If they want to go nuclear, they could say any state that funds public schools, which is all of them, have to fund religious schools too. That's one way this could also go. And so this is the concern. This is what people were worried about and thinking about when the oral arguments happened this week, because you want a hint of what exactly are these conservative justices who have the majority going to do here, right? By the way, not only is Drummond on the side of church-state separation, his other Oklahoma colleagues are very much not on his side. Governor Kevin Stitt, another MAGA Republican, is like, I want money to go to religion. Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction, he totally wants this school to get state dollars. He actually helped the board vote to allow this school to get, state dollars. So what happened at the actual oral argument this week? The biggest thing I can tell you is that things don't look good. That's not a surprise, but the question is, what were they going to do? Ian Millhiser, a writer at Vox.com, summarized the oral arguments this way, and he basically honed in on something Brett Kavanaugh said. Brett Kavanaugh's argument, is that so long as an American can choose not to participate in a state-backed religious operation, church and state don't need to be separate. Indeed, separation of church and state is often unconstitutional. Separation of church and state itself is unconstitutional. Brett Kavanaugh's argument during oral arguments was that, look, nobody's forcing kids to go to this Catholic school. Therefore, church-state separation has not been violated. But if you think giving taxpayer dollars to a Catholic school is okay, then we don't have church-state separation. So this, whatever the thread he is trying to do here, it doesn't make any sense. And Kavanaugh's new regime would mandate a great deal of state funding for religious schools, so long as parents retain a choice about where to send their child. You can imagine where this goes, because if he rules the way he's suggesting here, and that becomes the new law, then states would have to fund all sorts of religious schools. And they would be mostly Catholic, mostly private Christian type of schools. Taxpayers would have to fund all of that. And Brett Kavanaugh would say that's totally fine because no one's making you go to them. But where is that money coming from? That's money that would come out of the coffers meant for public schools that are supposed to educate everybody in a secular way. It's not hard to see where a bad decision here could go. It would mean a lot of public funding for religious schools, which, you have no way around this. That would mean destroying public schools across the country, which really is the goal of religious conservatives for such a long time. That has been their goal. Now, Elena Kagan, one of the liberal justices, she tried to point out that this would be a horrible idea. She spent much of the argument trying to draw out the implications of her court's new approach to religion. What if a religious charter school refuses to educate students who don't share the school's faith? What if that religious charter school wants to toss out state standards altogether? She brought up the example of an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva where instruction would focus almost entirely on the Talmud to the exclusion of math and English. Do we have to fund that school as well? And the answer is yeah. It doesn't matter to any of these justices, the conservative ones, if a religious charter school wants to impose its religious beliefs onto the students, onto the staff. If they say, yeah, we're not going to teach math anymore, but we are a school, we're a religious charter school, and you have to fund us, they can get away with not having to follow state standards either. No laws would apply to them. They're basically immune from doing the things you need a school to do, and you would expect a taxpayer-funded public school to do. They would just get around that by just saying, we're religious. We have these beliefs. I mean, this is where things could go. I think this may be the reason Amy Coney Barrett felt fine recusing herself from this case, maybe because she knows damn well that there are still 5 of her buddies ready to dismantle church-state separation. You don't need my vote. I will leave here just to avoid any misperceptions. So that's scary. I mean, the one silver lining during the oral arguments appeared to be that John Roberts, who is somehow the only possible moderate voice, which is a scary thing to say, John Roberts kind of needled both sides of the argument. He made some of the arguments I'm making here. He also pointed out that slippery slope of what could happen if you have taxpayer dollars going to religious schools. But also, he's John Roberts. He's totally going to do the thing conservatives always do. Why should we expect him to suddenly join with the liberals on this issue and allow the Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision to stand? So right now, the best hope liberals have is finding some argument that John Roberts can latch onto because the rest of the justices are hopeless. And that's never a bet you want to take. That's like saying, well, I hope a Republican senator will do the right thing. They're not. Where have you been? You can't count on them to do the right thing. So that's where we're at. The only question now is not who's going to win or lose. It doesn't look good for church-state separation. The question is, what will the scope be of the final decision? Does it apply to just that school? Does it apply to just Oklahoma? Does it dismantle public education as we know it across the country? Who knows? So I will pause there for now. It's a scary story. But if you have questions, I'm going to scroll up right now and just see what questions we have. I appreciate this donation here. Satanic Temple to open a school after this. This is an interesting thought. Let's say the Supreme Court says you can have taxpayer dollars going to public schools and religious schools count. They can count under that system. First of all, the barrier to opening your own school is a huge, huge one. It takes a lot of money. You got to have staff to pull it off. There's a lot of things that have to happen. And even a group like the Satanic Temple that you would imagine doing this, Where they have pushed for that sort of argument is let's have after school clubs because you need like one volunteer to run it and someone to manage like the paperwork. That's relatively easy. What about release time from school, taking kids out of class to go have religious education? It's also not hard to say, we'll set up a transportation system, take you to a building, have one volunteer teach those classes. But the idea that the Satanic Temple or even an atheist or humanist group would go through all the hassle of literally setting up their own school and all the professional paperwork you need done to make that happen, that's not something they could really pull off. It's why you really don't see any like humanist charter schools across the country either, because we just don't have the money or the manpower to pull that off. And also, what's the difference between a humanist charter school and like a good public school that just doesn't push religion into it? Because we are not trying to push atheism, and the Satanic Temple isn't trying to push Satan onto kids. All we want is for a good, strong public school system that is secular and teaches comprehensive things like sex education and science education. You don't need a Satanic Temple version of this, but even if they wanted to, they couldn't just magically pull this one out of their ass like they could in other cases. So as much as I want to think, okay, if they want to open that door, we're going to be right there. No, we won't. It's Catholic schools. It's fundamentalist Christian schools that have the money and the resources to pull this sort of stuff off. It's also why, if they say you can have religious, taxpayer-funded religious schools, a lot of minority religions and smaller Christian groups would be shut out because they just can't build their own school from scratch. They can't even rent it out and staff it. They don't have that sort of those resources. So I don't think that's going to happen. Blaze Bunny points out this is all a part of Project 2025. Nothing about this is new. People should have taken it more seriously. I mean, dismantling public education, absolutely a part of Project 2025, even if this particular case was not. So yeah, very scary stuff. This is an interesting comment. The fact that the school's religious honestly seems moot since the school doesn't comply with basic public school standards. And this is where there might be pushback. Let's say the Supreme Court says, yeah, if you're a public charter school and you happen to be religious, taxpayer funds still can go to you. What lawmakers would then have to do is to say, fine, we're going to allow religious schools to have access to the funds. However, all schools must have accessibility for students with disabilities. And then that's a barrier those religious groups would have to go through. Maybe they might do what they did in Maine, where they say, okay, fine, you can be eligible for public funding, but you can't discriminate against LGBTQ students or staffers. And all of a sudden, those religious schools would have to ask themselves, is this the hill we want to die on? So there is a way to push back against it, but you shouldn't have to push back against something like this. Like, you should just be able to have a good public school system that's there to benefit everybody. It's really frustrating. Hammond, do you think in this new Trump era, church-state separation will still be a thing at the end of his term? I mean, he's not going to pass a law. Congress is not going to pass a law saying, let's get rid of the First Amendment. Let's get rid of the Establishment Clause. What they will do is what they've always done, which is they chip away at it, but they don't tell you that's what they're doing. Those of us who follow this stuff totally know that's what they're doing. I mean, just today, what did Trump do? He fired Mike Waltz, one of his security guys, the guy who invited the journalist onto his Signal chat. And today, finally, Trump said he's fired, but he didn't say that. They waited for a couple weeks for the story to die down. And then today, Trump said, I'm removing him from the security post and making him UN ambassador. So what did he do? Well, he fired the dude. What did he say he's going to do, though? J.D. Vance said in an interview today, we're just giving him a promotion. Like, that's how they do it. They don't want to tell you the truth. They find a way to spin what's totally going on. But you only know that if you actually follow the story. So that's what I think is going to happen. He's not like, Trump's not going to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. They're not going to pass a law getting rid of it. What they will do is just say, all right, IRS, we're going to defund you so you don't have any staff. And by the way, even if you do have staff, just ignore this So the law is there, but no one's there to enforce it. That's how church-state separation will die. Not because they, exploded a hole into the wall between church and state. It's by just saying, hey, this wall, it doesn't mean anything. Let's just pretend it's not there. And then what happens? Like, it's there in writing, but no one's paying attention to it. It's there in the law, but Trump has installed enough judges who just ignore it. That is what I fear is going to happen. Who can we call or write to voice our opposition? I assume you are writing this about the Supreme Court case, and the answer is nobody. You can go back in time and write letters to Trump voters in October of 2024 and tell them, don't make the mistake that we totally know you're going to make. I mean, Canada found a way to make the right decision. They're much smarter in Canada than they are here.